Good evening. For 15 years, British governments have kept him out. But today the ban on Louis Farrakhan was quashed by the High Court. The controversial American leader of the Nation of Islam was judged by successive Home Secretaries to be a dangerous racist, anti-white, anti-Semitic, and an admirer of Hitler. He says now he'll be coming to Britain in the autumn.
This week, on the cover of Time magazine, Louis Farrakhan appears.
Coming next, the determined leader of the Nation of Islam, Minister Louis Farrakhan. What does he believe? What is his mission? Coming up.
To the best of my knowledge, this is the first time that a black man has been put on the cover of Time magazine to be held up to public scorn and ridicule.
This man has been banned from Britain over his views on race, yet this year he called 1 million black men to Washington.
Even though some would give their eye tooth to be on the cover of Time magazine.
This is ABC News Nightline. Reporting from Washington, Ted Koppel.
Say what you will, think what you will about Louis Farrakhan, the Million Man March, which took place here in Washington 1 year ago tomorrow, would not have happened without him. He conceived it, he was the driving force behind it.
But let's look at the words. Ministry of Rage.
Good evening. Whatever you think about Minister Louis Farrakhan, there's no doubt about his ability to arouse passionate responses, whether of enthusiasm or revulsion.
Louis Farrakhan spews racist venom at Jews and all of white America. Why do so many blacks say he speaks for them?
A World View from CNN.
I'm Judy Woodruff in Washington. On a visit to Baghdad, Louis Farrakhan calls the U.S. government a threat to world peace. We'll speak with the controversial Nation of Islam leader live from the Iraqi capital.
This is an insult, not only to me, but it is an insult to all black people in America. Why do I say that?
My interview, an exclusive interview with the Nation of Islam leader Louis Farrakhan. Why did he go? Late edition. We'll be right back.
On the inside, they have commissioned a poll to be taken by Mr. Yankelovich. I know that's not us.
A man who's respected and reviled. With Nation of Islam leader Louis Farrakhan, there's very little, if any, middle ground. If you have a question for Louis Farrakhan, you can call now. The phone number is 1-404-525-6888.
The question is asked, which of these descriptions apply to Louis Farrakhan? Someone who says things the country should hear.
And welcome back to Hannity Holmes. I'm Sean Hannity. Today, Nation of Islam leader Louis Farrakhan was asked at a press conference about a critic who questioned the participation of racists and anti-Semites in this weekend's Millions More March. Let's take a look at his response.
70% of those polled say that I'm saying something that the country should hear.
Wednesday marks the first anniversary of Louis Farrakhan's Million Man March in Washington. The event caused controversy, much discussion, and also praise.
Are you insulting us? Would you have us believe that 70% of black America wants the country to hear a man who spews racist venom at Jews and all of white America? Is that what black people want the country to hear? Let's go on.
1 year after leading the Million Man March in Washington, Farrakhan is holding a rally for what he calls a World Day of Atonement.
Is Farrakhan an effective leader?
But in some sectors of white America, Minister Farrakhan is regarded as a man who's built his power base through attacks on whites in general and Jews in particular.
67%, according to Mr. Yankovic, 67% says he is.
Controversial black political leader Louis Farrakhan has won an extraordinary legal victory in Britain. The High Court overturned a ban which had stopped him entering the UK since 1986. The British government is worried that Farrakhan's presence may stir up racial conflict, but his supporters say he's changed.
But listen to this. Does he speak the truth?
The call for a million-man march came from the radical religious movement, the Nation of Islam. Its leader, Louis Farrakhan, is accused of being racist and anti-Semitic.
63% of black America recognizes that Farrakhan speaks the truth. That's the answer. Black people want America to hear the truth because it's the truth and the truth alone that will set us free and set America free from the wicked forces that are controlling America. Let's go on.
Here's the Minister Louis Farrakhan in his second visit to our program.
Is Farrakhan good for the black community?
The so-called Million Man March has been organized by Louis Farrakhan, the leader of the Nation of Islam.
62% of black people say he is. What makes him good? Venom, racism, rage, hatred, anti-Semitism. Is that what makes Farrakhan good? Let me go on.
Minister Farrakhan was born in New York City in 1933, raised in Boston, was an honor student in high school where he was a track star and violinist. His first career was as a singer of calypso music, but he soon turned to full-time work in his religious faith, the Muslim faith. He's become extremely controversial. Here is a brief look at why.
Is he a role model for black youth?
And at least one American, Nation of Islam leader Louis Farrakhan, agrees that the U.S., not Saddam Hussein, is to blame for the suffering of the Iraqi people. Farrakhan plans to visit Iraq on his upcoming 52-nation world tour.
53% in black America said he is a role model for black youth. Do black youth need a role model who is a racist, a bigot, an anti-Semite, full of rage and a spewer of venom? I think not.
But even though many Americans, black and white, perceive him as a racist, this leader of the Nation of Islam, with his million-man march last October, made himself a force to be reckoned with.
Is he somebody you would like your children to pattern after?
Just a couple of months ago in November, that once again, Louis Farrakhan, the head of the Nation of Islam, referred to Judaism as a gutter religion.
Well, 53% say yes.
But is the message of unity possible if the messenger is Louis Farrakhan? We review the Million Man March ahead on Larry King Live.
Now, live from Washington, here's Larry King.
Well, my goodness. Then what is it, this ministry of rage?
Up there in Boston. It says here that you're a track runner at English High School and that you've equaled every record in school, right?
Yes, and I hope to break some next year when I put on a little more weight.
You do, huh?
Yes.
How about your violin? Can you play that as fast as you can run?
Well, not quite, but I've got a lot to learn. I hope to break some records with this someday.
You're just a champion at heart, aren't you? All right, what are you going to play?
I'm going to play Charters by Montez.
Montez Charters. Ladies and gentlemen, Louis Walcott.
It would be very surprising or interesting for many people to know that Minister Farrakhan has a confidant and a friend who is first of all white and secondly Republican.
I was taught at UCLA journalism that to be a good reporter, you don't stop asking questions until you run out of people with answers. So where I was told Minister Farrakhan is bigoted, he's prejudiced, he's anti-Semitic, I said, well, I have to see for myself.
What has Mr. Farrakhan done to earn your respect?
Earlier in this campaign, 2 or 3 people who I respect came to me, and not in this campaign, not part of the Gore Lieberman campaign, and said, Louis Farrakhan would like to meet you. He's gone through a crisis. He's had prostate cancer. He doesn't want to be the divisive person he's been, and maybe you can do something constructive with him. And it's my nature to be a bridge builder. Matter of fact, it's part of my faith to believe that everybody has the capacity to change. So when I was asked, would you meet with him, I said I would be open to it. You don't make progress and you don't build bridges unless you're willing to go to the other side of the bridge.
But you said, I have respect for him. What has he done to earn your respect?
I have respect for him as a fellow human being, and I have respect for some of the things his followers do, including those that I've observed and had some contact with in Connecticut in terms of their commitment to their families, the whole movement of acceptance of responsibility by the men within his movement for their families. So it's in that sense that I said I had some respect for him.
Would you demand, insist, that Mr. Farrakhan apologize for his anti-Semitic remarks as recently as 2 weeks ago before you sat down with him?
No, I thought, look, this is not going to happen before the election because of all the tumult around it, and I think nothing constructive would come out of it. But, you know, if there's a sincere intention that was expressed to me by people close to him and people who I respect to begin a dialogue and hopefully to create some bridges, not just to the Jewish American community, but to a lot of others, and to use the power he has, as I think he tried to recently in the Million Family March, which was open beyond his followers, beyond his religion, then I'm open to a quiet, private discussion. That's the way progress occurs. Again, you don't make peace with your friends. You have to reach out to make things better. There's very little risk involved, and maybe there's a chance of progress here, of peace, of growth.
I think in earlier years his passion and his emotions sometimes had him phrase things in ways that sound bites and the fringe listener could take and misinterpret. And I think that was, and I think Minister himself says that he's learned to watch more carefully how he phrases and says things. But I think the minister has been tremendously misinterpreted and defined by the media rather than listened to by the media.
It generated this headline: Kasich gets Farrakhan praise. He said, there's a certain passion in John Kasich that I believe could bode well for the Republican Party. Bob Novak, the conservative columnist, wrote that if Farrakhan and Kasich got together, the political landscape could be transformed. Could you get together with Minister Farrakhan and talk about Republican Party politics and the future of America?
That's what the circumstance was when the minister did say kind things about me. Look,
if the so-called Negro in America was truly an American citizen, we wouldn't have a racial problem. If the Emancipation Proclamation was authentic, we wouldn't have a race problem. If the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution were authentic, we wouldn't have a race problem. If the Supreme Court desegregation decision were authentic, we would not have a race problem.
This is the man the British government has banned for the last 16 years. He's been branded a race hater, a Jew baiter, the prophet of Babel, the Black Hitler.
2 years ago, when I was 58 years old, I decided that I would be serious and devote the time to develop the skill to perform in concert on my 60th birthday.
Well, Louis Farrakhan has mellowed. At least that's what his closest friends are saying. The leader of the Nation of Islam, based in the US, has in the past said that black children got AIDS because they were injected with the virus by Jews, whom he called bloodsuckers. He's never apologized, but he is now sufficiently middle of the road, say his followers, to warrant the overturning of the ban on him coming to Britain. They are challenging that ban in the courts tomorrow.
The piece that I was working on when I stopped taking lessons was the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto. I never knew that Mendelssohn was Jewish, and it didn't matter to me. Tremendous composer.
Has worried one Home Secretary after another for the last 16 years. But today, the High Court said the government could no longer ban the controversial black Muslim leader from coming here. Ministers have long thought his anti-Semitic and prejudiced beliefs could whip up racial violence.
Music are disorganized notes organized on a staff, properly composed, that the vibration of the sound of notes can produce harmony and dissonance only when it's written into the score.
Good evening. Louis Farrakhan, the American religious leader accused of preaching racism, has won his legal battle to visit the United Kingdom. The High Court announced the decision earlier today, despite consistent opposition from government ministers. For 15 years, the Home Office has opposed the visit because it fears that Farrakhan's views are racially divisive and might even provoke public disorder.
Different instruments of different sizes, shapes, and colors that make different sounds. But when the concert master of the violin comes out and he signals to the oboe, a long, black, thin-looking instrument. Black, mind you. Thin-looking instrument.
Won a court appeal allowing him to enter the United Kingdom. The British government banned him from entering the country back in 1986 on the grounds his presence could lead to public disorder.
Give us the A. And the oboe sounds, and all the musicians are playing, it sounds like madness. But the moment the concertmaster comes out and the signal is given and the A is sounded at 440 vibrations, then the rest of the orchestra tunes up to that long black thing. Now, why you got to put color in it, Brother Farrakhan?
Louis Farrakhan, coming to Britain, looks stronger than ever today. He won his appeal in the High Court against a long-standing ban on him visiting this country. For 15 years, successive Home Secretaries have kept him out because of his outspoken beliefs on Jews, whites and homosexuals.
To play with one mind, to make symphony.
A leader of a controversial religious organization in the United States can now travel to Britain. The Nation of Islam organization provides social, spiritual, and financial support to its followers, but some critics say its leader, Louis Farrakhan, is anti-white, anti-Semitic, and unwelcome in Britain.
Somebody said, well, why, Farrakhan? You got to play classics composed by some white man. And you supposed to be this black teacher.
Well, earlier I spoke to Louis Farrakhan's UK solicitor, Sadiq Khan, and I asked him if his client still thinks that Hitler is a great man.
Our music in the American idiom comes out of our life experience. Slavery was the basis for spirituals. If we didn't suffer slavery, we wouldn't have to sing Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, or Deep River. My home is over Jordan.
Won his appeal in the High Court against the long-standing order banning him from Britain.
Give you spirituals. We gave you gospel. We gave you jazz. We gave you blues. You gave us hell, and we gave you music.
Earlier, I met Louis Farrakhan's UK representative at a hotel in London, and I asked him if he understood why this exclusion order had been imposed.
So through my music, I want people to get acquainted with the soul of a black man. that you can't get acquainted with on a 30-second bite on a television station where the editors have a vested interest in promoting Louis Farrakhan as an anti-Semite or a hater. You don't know me.
His defiance itself is regarded as dangerous. With no history of violence, it's his ideas they're afraid of. His weapons are his words.
Minister Farrakhan, thanks for joining us. Tell our viewers in the United States and around the world why you went to Baghdad.
Minister Louis Farrakhan joins us now from Chicago. You have told us you wanted to make an opening statement, and we are pleased to give you the opportunity. Minister Farrakhan. Thank you. Louis Farrakhan, the spiritual leader of the Nation of Islam, is with us tonight. Minister Farrakhan, welcome to our broadcast.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
We're back on Meet the Press, and with us now, the leader of the Nation of Islam, Minister Louis Farrakhan. Welcome.
Thank you.
A lot to talk about, so let's begin. Louis Farrakhan joins me from our studios in New York.
For now, though, let's bring in Louis Farrakhan, leader of the Nation of Islam. He's joining us from Chicago for this Q&A. Mr. Farrakhan, welcome to Q&A.
Thank you very much. Honored to be here.
Minister Farrakhan, thank you for joining us. We greatly appreciate it.
I'm very honored to be with you, sir.
I appreciate that.
Minister Farrakhan, thank you very much for joining us. This is a pretty controversial trip, sir. What do you hope to achieve, and have you or will you be meeting with President Saddam Hussein?
Thank you. Honored to be here.
Bob Novak heard you speak in Florida recently and wrote a column entitled Farrakhan and the GOP. And he says that Farrakhan is knocking on the door of the Republican Party, the first modern black leader to do so. But who will open the door and sit down and talk to him? You just heard John Kasich, whom you praised. Jack Kemp last night said it's impossible to sit down with you because of things you said. Are you trying to reach out and play a role in the Republican Party?
First, let me say that when men of high political standing say that it is impossible to sit down with Farrakhan because of the things he has said, should I then say it is impossible to sit down with white people for the things that they have done? I speak words, and I believe my words are truth. But what my people have suffered and continue to suffer in America is very real. So if there's going to be some meeting of the minds, intelligent people should sit down, pardon me, and not give me preconditions, but sit down and talk about the future of this nation and the future of suffering people in America.
Please tell the Honorable Elijah Muhammad that I have dedicated my life to telling the white devil the truth to his face. I greet you with the ancient words of peace. Assalamu alaikum.
How do you do that? Do you believe that Democrats would let you play a part in the convention? I mean, that's really where power is brokered, at that convention.
Well, I don't necessarily think at this point that they will permit me to play a part.
Do you want to?
Not really. We're building now. So if we don't play a major a role this time around, 4 years from now, I really don't think we can be denied.
Sir, you are drawing thousands and thousands of people in your public appearances. We have media's responsibility is to figure this person out. Wow. You're powerful. Look at this crowd here. You're a powerful man. You can draw a crowd.
Tonight, Louis Farrakhan.
In an interview on CNN's Late Edition with Frank Sisno, Farrakhan dismissed charges by Vice President Al Gore that the Nation of Islam leader is un-American.
The leader of the Nation of Islam movement, Louis Farrakhan.
Leader Louis Farrakhan is holding a commemorative rally in New York, and he plans to call on all governments to end violence, injustice and oppression.
Hundreds of thousands of black American men converged on Washington today for the Million Man March, a rally organized by the controversial leader of the self-styled Nation of Islam, Louis Farrakhan.
Nation of Islam leader Louis Farrakhan headed last year's event, and he is at the helm once again.
Of the Nation of Islam, Louis Farrakhan. In a fiery speech, he spoke of the fabric of America being torn apart.
Iraq is on the itinerary of Nation of Islam leader Louis Farrakhan, who leaves tomorrow on a world tour of 52 countries. U.S. officials have warned an Iraq visit would be illegal, but Farrakhan says he doesn't think there's anything wrong with a Muslim visiting a Muslim country.
Some black politicians have boycotted the event because they claim its organizer, Louis Farrakhan, is anti-Semitic, anti-white, and anti-homosexual.
Nation of Islam leader Louis Farrakhan just visited Iraq for several days. Earlier today, I spoke exclusively with Minister Farrakhan from the capital of Zimbabwe, Harare.
The 1 Million Man March has been organized by the controversial leader of the Nation of Islam, Louis Farrakhan.
Coming next, Minister Louis Farrakhan on tomorrow's Million Family March and why he wants to meet with Joe Lieberman, vice presidential candidate.
From Baghdad, the leader of the United States-based Nation of Islam is blasting the U.S. government.
It's been declared a day for black empowerment by Louis Farrakhan, leader of the American Nation of Islam. He's attempting to get up to 1 million black Americans to march through Washington.
Still ahead on Newsnight, Michael Jackson, and are they his new best friends? The Nation of Islam is somehow involved in the pop star's life and problems.
The Million Man March was a triumph for Louis Farrakhan, the leader of the Nation of Islam, whose anti-Semitic and homophobic comments have threatened to alienate some black groups.
The leader of the U.S. Nation of Islam said Wednesday history will view President Clinton as a, quote, killer of babies, unquote, if he does not move to lift UN sanctions against Iraq. Louis Farrakhan is in Baghdad on what he's calling a mission from God.
But many community leaders, both black and white, have accused Farrakhan of anti-Semitism, sexism and bigotry.
Today, your chance to talk directly with one of the world's most powerful yet most controversial men. Minister Louis Farrakhan is leader of the Nation of Islam. He was the force behind the Million Man March in the United States in October 1995.
Can whites, blacks, Hispanics, Christians, Jews, Muslims all live together in harmony? We'll ask the leader of the Nation of Islam, Minister Louis Farrakhan.
In geopolitics, it might be called a strategic alliance. In business, it might be called a marriage of convenience. In Santa Barbara, California, it's called Michael Jackson and the Nation of Islam. Here's CNN's Frank Buck.
To the hospital.
Large turnout by the all-black Nation of Islam added to the them against us atmosphere. But as the hearing started, it was halted dramatically. Members of the Nation of Islam marched in shouting, "This is a sham, an insult to black people." They tried to confront Jamie Acourt, who was giving evidence. After the scuffle, members of the Nation of Islam stormed into the inquiry chamber. Jamie Acourt, then in the witness box, was bundled out of the chamber by officials and police as one man attempted to lunge at him. Members of the Nation of Islam denounced the inquiry as a sham, saying people were prevented from coming in. The Nation of Islam are also here in numbers, despite accusations from some that they effectively hijacked proceedings yesterday and took the spotlight off the parliament. The Nation of Islam were also present. Yesterday, their members had precipitated a violent clash with police, resulting in CS spray being used.
black militant group, the Nation of Islam, again tried to gain entrance to the chamber.
I want to serve notice on Mr. Richardson and the government of the United States. I'm not your slave. This is not a plantation. I'm a free man of God, and I will do what God's Spirit will require of me in the interest of peace.
Louis Farrakhan, the leader of the Nation of Islam and banned from Britain, freedom fighter or minister of rage.
As a follower of the Honorable Louis Farrakhan, I know that he is none of those things that have been alleged that he is. I know the Honorable Louis Farrakhan is a man who, if permitted to come to the United Kingdom, will only do good.
He's made some extremely offensive remarks about the Jewish religion and about Jewish people generally. He's questioned many aspects of the Holocaust, and by and large he has shown himself to be somebody who indulges in racial incitement.
If he's got an opinion that he wants to express to us as a nation of black people, then more power to him.
And it's very clear to me, if you were at the march today, a lot of things that Minister Farrakhan talked about self-reliance, the black community doing for itself, are the kinds of things I think will spiritually work for the black community. And I think that's why Minister Farrakhan has so much appeal, an appeal across class lines. If you were at that march, there were poor people, there were children, there were doctors, there were lawyers and so on, because they were concerned about doing something for the black community that he inspired.
Farrakhan has over the years made vicious racist statements, and a person like him should not be allowed into this country. He described Hitler as a genius and a great man. He's made odious attacks on Jews.
He has been quoted as saying these things. He actually wants to come to the United Kingdom, so those who read these quotes can actually get a chance to engage the man himself.
Here, ministers say they're very disappointed by today's ruling. They're considering an appeal. They insist the government's trying to defend Britain's social cohesion and racial harmony.
The UK is the only country in the world to have an exclusion order on Minister Farrakhan. Minister Farrakhan has been to trips to Israel, to Canada, to Australia, to Europe, and there's been no problems at all and no refusal of him being allowed in. He's been to South Africa as well. Wherever he's been, there has been no problems. His trips have been well received. There has never been any problems or any hint of any problems.
The decision to admit Mr. Farrakhan doesn't mean to say he can come here and break the law. People who come to Britain, however undesirable, have to obey the laws of Britain.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing. I reckon he's going to kick ass when he comes over here.
Surely that can't be
like with his speech.
One of the things that Reverend Farrakhan said is he told the men to go back to their communities. And he said, if necessary, you join an organization that will help you in your community. And he named a number of those, including the NAACP.
He will know there are so many people here who would wish him to be outside our shores. If he does come, I would certainly encourage anyone over whom I have any influence to treat him with contempt.
One of the things that Mr. Farrakhan talks about is the importance of self-empowerment, of education, of owning your own businesses, of determining your own future. And I think that that definitely strikes a chord with, a lot of men who find it very difficult to actually make their way and make a future for themselves in Britain.
This decision is unprecedented. It's the first time a ban has been overturned under the new Human Rights Act. But it doesn't mean Louis Farrakhan will be arriving overnight. He'll have to wait at least another 2 months until the judge has published the reasons for his decision in full.
Now the citizens of the United Kingdom will have a chance in the near future to see and to hear and judge the Honourable Minister Louis Farrakhan for themselves.
This ban has been on me for nearly 17 years. And I think it's largely because after the Jesse Jackson campaign, there was this, I would say, polemic in dialogue between myself and the Jewish community. And because that dialogue was not resolved, it seemed as though the Jewish community in the UK utilized their influence to say that I was not a good person to come to the United Kingdom. And so from that day to this, I have been banned.
Banned for many years, Louis Farrakhan says he's looking forward to visiting.
He calls Jews bloodsuckers, whites devils, so should he be allowed to speak in the UK?
When a black man arises that threatens white supremacy, there is a knee-jerk reaction like, oh my God, this man has come to destroy our world. No, this man has come to destroy a fallacious idea that has made you a devil.
These children are proof that with or without Louis Farrakhan, the Nation of Islam is already a presence in Britain. They're pupils at a school funded by Minister Farrakhan's militant black organization. It wants a separate state for black Americans and is hoping to extend its reach here in the UK.
Black, destitute of light, devoid of color, enveloped in darkness, hence utterly dismal or gloomy, as the future looked black.
Pretty good with them words, ain't you?
Soiled with dirt, foul, sullen, hostile, forbidding, as a black day.
It says the ADL has told Senator Lieberman that if he were to meet Louis Farrakhan, he would be legitimatizing a bigot, an anti-Semite, a racist who continues to spout his message of hate. In their September 27th letter, Howard P. Berkowitz, ADL National Chair, Abraham H. Foxman, ADL National Director, reminded the Senator that, quote, Minister Farrakhan and his Nation of Islam have spread the message of black separatism and anti-gay, anti-Catholic, racist, and anti-Semitic bigotry throughout the United States and the world.
Mr. Foxman, I think, likes to use Farrakhan to raise money for the Anti-Defamation League, and I believe that's why he opposes any sitting down with Louis Farrakhan and the leadership of the Jewish community. For nearly 16 years, I have asked for a dialogue with the leadership of the ADL and the leadership of the Jewish community. Many rabbis have met with me and I with them, but when it comes to serious dialogue, the ADL always steps in to sabotage that effort because they want to keep me as a pariah so they can use me to raise money.
For 15 years, successive Home Secretaries have said no. The High Court said yes.
So they purposely put a veil over me that he's anti-white, he's anti-Semitic, he's anti-American, he's anti-Christian, he's anti-gay. So when you put that on me, then people of intelligence, rational people say, I don't want anything to do with that man. That is exactly the intention of those in power.
And if you will take the time to read the Washington Post that came out the Sunday after that incident took place, the Washington Post pointed out on the front page that the Muslims had nothing to do with the UN riots. And they quoted, in saying so, the person who was at that time the commissioner of police in New York City. See, it's lies that the white man has spread about the Muslims to try and make you afraid of the Muslims or to try and make you think that the Muslims were a criminal element, an uncouth element, and things that you would not like to be associated with.
This was Louis Farrakhan's finest moment, the Million Man March in October 1995.
Described as a black racist, Farrakhan advocates a separate African-American state and talks of settling the score with whites over slavery.
I think someone in the audience said it right. Shame, shame, shame.
Shame on who?
On you.
On me?
Yes, because you keep repeating the big lie. The lie that's told over.
But has praised Adolf Hitler.
And over.
A man who calls Hitler great.
And over.
And describes Hitler as a great man.
And over again.
With anti-Semitic and racially divisive views.
Until Jews and blacks and others believe that I actually said that.
A powerful orator in the mould of Malcolm X, Minister Farrakhan toured the States throughout the 90s, preaching the need for blacks and whites to separate, for black people to live in their own territory. They were, he argued, God's chosen people. Whites, a devil race.
The earth belongs to us, the black man, and whatever is around it or on it or in it belongs to us.
And then as suddenly as he came, he was gone.
Elijah Muhammad also said that whites are blue-eyed devils. Do you believe that?
Well, you have not been saints in the way you have acted toward the darker people of the world and toward even your own people. But in truth, Mr. Russert, any human being who gives themselves over to the doing of evil could be considered a devil.
But he has an undeniably strong following. Even his claims to have been on an alien spaceship didn't stop hundreds of thousands turning out for his Washington Million Man March in '95.
Britain once ruled the entire world, and Britain has nothing to fear from her citizens listening to a man and making their own judgment as to whether that man is worthy to be listened to or to be discarded.
Farrakhan has been banned from Britain since 1986 on the grounds he could incite racial hatred or unrest.
I'm hoping that sometime this year or next year or whenever that they will remove the ban, because I don't see myself as anti-Semitic.
He's met with Nelson Mandela in South Africa, and his supporters argue other trips, including one to Israel, had no problems. Farrakhan has now assured the British consulate in Chicago he would obey UK laws whilst here.
The oppressed in the scheme of reconciliation must not bear the burden of such horror, I would say, as the 9 days that Mrs. Mandela went through, and Mr. Botha can thumb his nose at such Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
Farrakhan is just one of 229 people currently excluded from Britain at the discretion of the Home Secretary.
The press vilifies the nation. He's the minister of rage. He's the minister of hate. He's anti-Semitic. I'm not that at all. I'm not that at all. I realize that once truth is told, falsehood vanishes. And if white supremacy is based on truth, then it will stand. If it's a false idea, it will fail.
Others, though, who also invoke huge opposition, have remained free to visit Britain, like Jean-Marie Le Pen, the leader of the French National Front, and William Pierce, author of the Turner Diaries, a book revered by white American supremacists, believed to have inspired the Oklahoma bomber Timothy McVeigh.
When you move jobs from the inner cities to the suburbs into foreign markets, leaving the black male, the Hispanic, and the poor white in the lurch, when there's no real job retraining that would cause our people to be able to fit in a service-oriented economy, and with the introduction of drugs and guns and the gang warfare, our young black males are in funeral parlors, they're in prisons, and they are being turned into that which God never intended, so that it leaves the female, the black female, in the lurch.
This is the charismatic, colourful and above all controversial Louis Farrakhan, a man successive Home Secretaries have banned from Britain, a man reputed to have called whites devils and Jews bloodsuckers.
Now you, in your silliness, are so forgiving. White folk ain't even asked for forgiveness. I want you to hear me.
Louis Farrakhan is one of the most powerful black political figures in America today. He became a household name 5 years ago when he led a march of 1 million black Americans in Washington.
White folk haven't even acknowledged that they did you wrong. They have not repented for what they did to your fathers and what they're doing to you and what they plan against your future.
In America, his Nation of Islam boasts hundreds of thousands of members, most famous for their 1 million man march on Washington.
No, I will not allow America or you, Mr. Wallace, to condemn them as the most corrupt nation on earth when you have spilled the blood of human beings. Has Nigeria dropped an atomic bomb and killed people in Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Have they killed off millions of Native Americans? How dare you put yourself in that position as a moral judge? I think you should keep quiet. Because with that much blood on America's hands, you have no right to speak. I will speak because I don't have that blood on my hand.
But for 16 years, this man's been banned from Britain for fear he'd raise racial tensions and even cause public disorder because of anti-Semitic remarks he's made in the past. Today, a High Court judge overturned the ban to the delight of his supporters.
No, I am not speaking strongly against the Jewish community at all. When you say anything critical of members of the Jewish community because of their suffering throughout the world, they take that very, very serious, and they label whoever criticizes them as anti-Semitic. But Farrakhan is not anti-Semitic, he's just anti-injustice.
Tonight, the movement's spokesman in Britain told ITV News their leader is much misunderstood.
The Honourable Louis Farrakhan would not enjoy international support as he does if he was a racist. I am his representative here in the United Kingdom, and I am not a racist.
But he's called white devils, he's called Jews bloodsuckers.
He's been quoted as saying these things. He actually wants to come to the United Kingdom, so those who read these quotes can actually get a chance to engage the man himself.
And if Gaddafi and his people are guilty of that, they stand condemned. But to condemn them, look, man, look how long America said it was Syria at first. And 2 years later, they said, no, it's Gaddafi. Is that part of a foreign policy objective to destroy Libya because you can't control her? This is what makes me very angry with the government of the United States. A big coward picking on little governments. Why don't you go to China and make China democratic? Why would you pick on Cuba? What is wrong with the right of self-determination? Should not the Cuban people, if they want to be communists, choose that form of government? What do you have to say about it? America is wrong. And if America is the great citadel of democracy, show the world your democracy and the world will follow you. But don't try to force us to bow down to your will.
Nearly everyone we stopped had heard of him and his supporters.
College did not make Farrakhan. But I'm a made man. And you have to say, you admire the mold that I'm made in, but I'm not made by the universities of this world. I am made by Elijah Muhammad. Now, what kind of mold? Wait a minute. What kind of mold did Elijah have to make a Farrakhan and a Malcolm and thousands of others, and then turn me loose in America and the world, that with a word out of my mouth, I am transforming by the power of God the lives of tens of hundreds of thousands of black men and women. That doesn't come from reading a book.
We don't care what your religion is. We don't care what organization you belong to. We don't care how far in school you went or didn't go. We don't care what kind of job you have. We have to give you credit for shocking the white man by not letting him divide you and use you one against the other.
No one knows exactly how much support they've got. This is one area they've targeted. Here, the black population is relatively high, and they seem to have had most success in getting support from young people.
I am called a hate teacher, a hate preacher, an anti-Semite, a bigot, and nobody wants to talk with me because it doesn't appear that I have love in my heart. But look, in the 20 years that I have been the leader of the Nation of Islam, there is not one single incident of any Muslim being arrested for a hate crime.
He's said to have mellowed with age. He's met Nelson Mandela, even visited Israel. Now a High Court judge says he should be free to come to Britain. The Jewish community here have reacted with dismay.
I have not plucked one hair out of the head of no white person or black person, no Jewish child. You have never seen Farrakhan say one thing about harming Jewish people or white people or any people for that. So don't compare me with the killers that arise out of your race that bombed a levee in 1927 and may have repeated it, and constantly are thinking about ending a useless population's life in America and throughout the world. I have harmed no man, so I am not that. We will take care of our business whether men like that like it or not.
The decision to let Louis Farrakhan in is unprecedented. It's the first time an exclusion order has been overturned under the new Human Rights Act, but it's angered the government, which is considering an appeal.
I went to those countries like his Secretary of State goes, and nobody accuses the Secretary of State. Religious leaders go to countries that the former president called an evil empire to call those persons to God, and that was my mission.
Farrakhan is known for his highly charged rhetoric and negative statements about Jews.
You know what I think? I think you've given up.
Given up on what?
On the ideal of an integrated America, the dream of Martin Luther King. I think you've given up. I'm not trying to be a smart aleck now. I'm telling you honestly that I think you've given up.
If I may respond, the Kerner Commission, established by President Johnson in 1967, said that there were two societies, one black, one white, one rich, one poor. And the Kerner Commission gave specific recommendations that had to be followed if America believed in integration. 20 years after that, a group of scientists got together to see what the progress was. And the progress is that we have a larger middle class, but the masses of black people have gone backward. And the country is not only separate and unequal, but in worse condition today than it was then. So I don't think, Mr. Donahue, you should put it on me that I've given up. America has never believed in integration. Never.
For 16 years, he's been banned from the UK. Today, a High Court judge accepted the views of his supporters that his exclusion was an infringement of his human rights.
We have 400 major corporations that contribute to the Congress. According to what I read last week, they have contributed up to now over $400 million to Congress, and by the end of the year, these 400 companies will contribute at least $1 billion to Congress to make laws that favor them. And most of these corporations operate in countries throughout the world and are interested in who those leaders are. And if a leader arises that does not lead for the greed and wealth of American corporations or British corporations, then American intelligence, British intelligence will move on that leader. And that's why the CIA has been guilty of assassinations all over the country and then has the nerve to call somebody else a terrorist.
The ban stays in place until October, when the judge will explain his ruling. but Louis Farrakhan's supporters are already planning a British visit before the end of the year.
But it is not the right of the American government to interfere in the sovereign affairs of another nation. It's Saddam Hussein today. Where does it end? Is it Gaddafi tomorrow? Assad in Syria the day after? Fidel Castro the day after that? Anyone that doesn't agree with America or America disagrees with, do you have the right to assassinate such a leader, overthrow such a leader? Not in today's climate.
Successive Home Secretaries have refused to let him in for fear he'd raise racial tensions because of anti-Semitic remarks he's made in the past.
You know, Mr. Russett, this is really comical. The question should be, is what I have said the truth? And if it is the truth, I don't need to apologize for telling the truth. The problem with white America is you want me to apologize for being a man. You want me to apologize for speaking the truth. You want me to apologize for being bold and fearless. But you have never asked those who have lynched us, those who have discriminated against us, those who continue to deceive us, to atone for their evils. If I have done evil, Mr. Russett, I've said it here, I'll say it one more time. How then can I atone if you don't sit with me in a dialogue and show me where I am in error? If you show me where I am in error, I will come before the world and apologize. But you don't want to sit down with me in a dialogue. But I'll tell you this, Mr. Russett.
This is the Farrakhan effect. Hundreds of thousands drawn to the US Capitol to hear him preach black liberation. Many say it's a gospel of hate.
These that call me racist, let's look now. They have pushed the white race up, but not the white race up at the good of other races. They pushed themselves up at the expense of who? At the expense of black, brown, red, and yellow. So will the real racist or evil demon please stand up?
But responding to today's ruling by phone from the States, Louis Farrakhan denies incitement.
The question is it truth? If it is truth, then it is not anti-Semitic, it is truth. Why should anybody who criticizes Jewish behavior that ill affects black people and their pursuit of happiness be considered anti-Semitic? Last week, Orthodox Jews made the statement that Reform and conservative Jews are off the page of Judaism. I saw it not in the New York Times, but I saw it in the Chicago papers, just a little writing, but nobody called them anti-Semitic. But if I said that Reform Jews or conservative Jews or those that do not follow the laws, commandments, and statutes given by God to the prophets of Israel are not really Jews, then I'm considered anti-Semitic.
Banned from Britain for 16 years, now a High Court judge has ruled he's free to visit. The Jewish community is dismayed.
I want to say that no sane, intelligent, religious person could ever condemn the revealed word of God from the source of purity as dirty or gutter or unclean. The word of God comes to people in the gutter to purify their actions and their conduct and cause them to live upright. But religion is not what we preach. Religion was and is what we practice, and that's why Moses told Israel, obey the law and statutes and commandments that I give you this day. Jesus said, be ye doers of the word and not just hearers of the word, and Muhammad taught that mere belief counts for nothing except that it is carried into practice. I close this, and I hope I never have to answer this again. Black people are in this country because so-called Christians, not practicing the true word of Jesus Christ, were practicing a dirty religion. Some so-called Muslims were involved in the slave trade and in some wicked dealings in Africa, not doing what the prophet said, but practicing dirty religion. So Muslims... And I said, sir, that Israel practiced dirty religion, taking the land from the Palestinians, using lying, thieving, and murder, and the name of God as a shield for their dirty practice in the name of God. And this is a travesty in religion.
Louis Farrakhan's popularity here grew after supporters attended the Stephen Lawrence inquiry. These men are Muslims with strong political and social leanings who champion black causes. Their organization, Nation of Islam, was founded in 1930. It's run with military precision from headquarters in Chicago. Louis Farrakhan followed Malcolm X, an earlier leader. Nation of Islam would like a separate black American state.
If the Jewish leaders can show me in truth where I spoke other than the truth, then I would have to apologize, and I'm not too big to do that. But I can never apologize for speaking the truth.
Louis Farrakhan was recruited into the Nation of Islam by Malcolm X in 1956. He rose to lead the movement in 1978, achieving successes like the Million Man March in 1995. But he's courted controversy with his racist remarks. He's described whites as devils and Jews as bloodsuckers, and once said, "Remember, when God puts you in the ovens, it's forever."
I want to sit down and dialogue with the members of the Jewish community with no preconditions. That demand for me to apologize comes out of an arrogance that makes one feel that if I am critical of Jewish behavior relative to black people, that all of a sudden I have to apologize for being critical. No prophet of God that God sent to the children of Israel was ever asked to apologize for pointing out the error of Jewish ways. Not that I am a prophet, but I don't think that I should have to apologize unless I am shown that there's something that I said that is untrue, that is not correct. Then I would have no problem whatsoever of going before the world where I made my mistake and correct my mistake and ask for forgiveness.
For 15 years, successive Home Secretaries have kept the head of the Nation of Islam out because of his outspoken views.
If in any dialogue I can be shown to be in error, I would most surely apologize. But you cannot put me off in a corner and not dialogue with me and then say to me, Farrakhan speaks words that are hateful. If I can defend every word that I speak, and every word that I speak is truth, then I have nothing to apologize for. But if in a dialogue you can show me where I am in error, I am not a proud man. I will humble myself and go before the world and apologize. But now the burden is, will you show me where I am wrong?
Farrakhan, who has in the past described Hitler as a great leader and white people as devils, has promised to obey the law while he's here. The government is considering an appeal.
And so Gaddafi's my friend and my brother. He has never done anything against the good of black people in America, but my own government has proved to be the enemy of black people in America. So no, I'm happy to have Gaddafi as my friend. I'm happy to have the Libyan people as my friend. And frankly speaking, you in the United Nations should be ashamed of yourselves to sanction a country on the basis of an allegation that is not yet proved. And you should be ashamed of yourself that when Muammar Gaddafi will say he will let his nationals that are accused of Pan Am 103 to be tried in a third country, even in Scotland or at the World Court, that the United Nations should have said, we will try him at The Hague. We will try those people in Lockerbie. We will try them someplace so that the truth may be known. But you are not doing that. And I am ashamed that all of you are cowing down to America's foreign policy objectives, and I wish you would become more manly and more womanly and represent the strength of your nations, lest you be considered parasites and prostitutes who only are afraid of power and bow down to power and make deals with power for some little cheap end of yours. And what you're doing is sentencing the United Nations to death and the world to the cataclysmic war called the War of Armageddon. This sister right here, who has had her hand up a long time.
Well, a short while ago, Mr. Farrakhan said he was looking forward to visiting Britain as soon as possible to meet his followers. He said on BBC Radio that claims that he would incite violence were baseless.
I really don't think that there is any evidence that any violence follows my speeches or follows my teaching.
So why does Louis Farrakhan cause so much offence in some quarters, and who is the character now destined to visit Britain later this year? Right, let's talk to our correspondent Jane Standley, who's in the Harlem district of New York. That's one of Louis Farrakhan's strongholds. Jane, talk to us a little about the power base. How popular is he among his own constituency?
Well, I've been out on the streets of Harlem here today talking to people and asking them just that question. While many of them may not be Muslims, they say that Louis Farrakhan's support extends throughout the black community. Even people who don't agree with some of his views respect his position as a man, what he's done for the black community. One person here said to me, if you want to get something done in the community, you have social problems, you go to the Nation of Islam. They have great respect here for what they've done at a grassroots level for poor black people.
So from what you know of him there, Jane, what do you think he'll be trying to achieve when and if he visits Britain later this year?
People say that certainly his public profile has declined. He's been very sick with prostate cancer, but certainly this is a strong movement. People I've spoken to are very much in support of him now being allowed to come back to Britain, Hugh.
Jane, thank you very much for that.
The Million Family March tomorrow in Washington, what do you hope to achieve?
First, we would like to achieve a good turnout. We would like to give the people a seminal view of what the kingdom of God would look like when human beings, regardless of their race or their creed or their color, can come together on a higher principle of spirituality. And more importantly, we would like to begin a process of mobilization of the masses of our people to form a spiritual and moral but political and economic force that we could leverage to bring about real change in the quality of our lives.
The spirit of the Million Man March. Those who were there called it beautiful.
I wouldn't have missed this for my life.
And even critics had to call it impressive.
I'm not anti-Semitic. I do not hate Jews. I want this to be very clear. I do not hate Jews. I do not hate people because their skin is white. What I hate is evil and injustice and exploitation, whether a black does it, whether a white does it, whether a Jew, a Muslim, or a Christian does it.
I saw the name Million come out of my mouth and I watched it.
Louis Farrakhan's charisma is impressing America's blacks and alienating America's whites. Through this million-man march on Washington, Farrakhan believes he's empowering a minority who've been exploited, downtrodden and ignored for too long.
Just before he leaves, I'm telling you what he said to me. We were having dinner one day. And he said, brother, God has made me to take his place among the people. And I am making you to take mine. Then he said of my value, you are more valuable to me than all the wealth that is in the earth. He said, for that wealth I met when I came here, and I will leave it when I'm gone. But through you, I will get all of my people.
It was billed as a day of a new beginning, perhaps even for Louis Farrakhan. The controversial man, many believed, was poised to become a leader, the likes of which America had never seen.
You said, Minister, if we can close cities down across America with a Day of Atonement, it sends a political message of never again. What does that mean?
Well, first, this is a spiritual day. But when whites of this nation wake up on that morning and they don't see their cook, or we go to the airport and we don't see the baggage carrier, or you don't hear the music, or you don't see the face of black people, then you begin to think how relevant and how important are black people to this nation. And that's the political statement that we would like to send, that we will never again accept the position of a free slave or second-class citizen.
Not since the 1960s and the age of Martin Luther King has America experienced a day like this. Hundreds of thousands of black Americans marching in from all over the country to fill the Washington Mall.
We warn people that you gotta respect us. We've been respecting you for too long.
Like 30 years ago, making their agenda America's agenda. Like 30 years ago, forcing a Democratic president to respond.
Well, it's good that white America sees black folk absent in the malls, in the bar rooms, absent in the nightclub, absent in the air, in the airports. We want America to see what America would look like without our presence. And if you want us in America, we have to be here with justice. And if you don't want us, then just say, like Moses told Pharaoh, let the people go. Pharaoh should just say, well, we don't want you, and then let us go with some alimony.
Dawn in Washington, and the Capitol resounds with the unfamiliar cry of the muezzin calling the Islamic faithful to prayer. From all over the United States, tens of thousands of black men arrived for their Day of Atonement.
Well, this is, without doubt, the biggest gathering of blacks in the history of the United States, and one of the biggest marches Washington has ever seen.
You've also asked black athletes to refrain from playing sports on that day. It very well could be the 7th game of the Baltimore Orioles versus the Cleveland Indians. That night, it will be the San Diego Chargers versus the Kansas City Chiefs. Are you asking the black athletes who participate in those contests not to play on that day?
The day starts the evening, sundown of the 15th to sundown of the 16th. So I'm sure that those who are playing with the Chiefs or with the Orioles or other teams will be able to play. But that's a personal decision that each participant will have to make.
The politics of race, particularly when it's fueled by the language of anti-Semitic bigotry, that's one thing. The real meaning of what's happening here today is quite another. Because behind this demonstration lies a profound change in the black community, the like of which America has never seen before. After generations of political leadership telling them to blame others, notably whites, for their many woes, today they're being urged to look to themselves for solutions.
Well, to tell you the truth, when I first said 1 million, I saw the number go out of my mouth, and I looked at it, and I said, well, I've got to chase it because I've said it, but I thought I was inspired to say it. And I was very, very thankful to Almighty God that we had such a great number today.
It evoked memories of the 60s, of Martin Luther King dreaming of an integrated America. It was bigger than that, but oh so different. This was a militant, separatist black march, and America's whites were not welcome.
You find that old pale thing laying out in the sun, trying to get to look like you. That old pale thing.
To our black citizens, I honor the presence of hundreds of thousands of men in Washington today.
We carried no weapons. We threatened no laws. We broke no laws. But because we had an ideology and a philosophy that the government did not like, they didn't need laws passed by Congress to tap our phones, to follow us around, to harass us day and night.
Certainly on the campus of Washington's largest black college, we found literally no one who was not in favor of the march.
Slaves used to be brought right here on this mall in chains.
The march organized by a man who condemns whites and calls Jews bloodsuckers, from behind a bulletproof screen, giving his view of race in America.
There's still two Americas, one black, one white, separate and unequal.
This march could remind white people that most black people share their old-fashioned American values.
We are in our Jahiliyyah now. And if you will condemn us in our Jahiliyyah, God was merciful to you and came to you through Jibreel and raised you up a prophet. Now here we are in a degraded state, and you will not bring the Quran to us. You will not teach us the civilizing message of Islam. You will go to whites and spend your time with white people, and we are tapping our way to Islam like the blind man in Surah Al-Abasa. We are trying to get you to look at us, to help us. And you look away because we are a disturbance to you, these blacks in America. You have to change that attitude in the Arab world. And if you do not, the judgment of God will overtake the Arab world just like it's overtaken the white world.
As this landmark of a demonstration came to a close this afternoon, the sense of hundreds of thousands of individuals taking responsibility could hardly have been clearer.
Well, they called for a peaceful march, and peaceful it has been so far. They called for 1 million men. They may not have that, but they certainly have enough to make this a milestone in black politics.
This is what you said, sir. Who controls black arts? Who controls black sports figures? Who controls black intellectuals, black politicians? When I talk to the Jews, I'm talking to a segment of that quorum that holds my people in their grip.
And that is true. Look at Mr. Novak. Look at, he just said a few kind words about my work, and look at the kind of brickbats he has received. Mayor Rendell invited me to Philadelphia, and look at the brickbats he's receiving from his own people. Yes, they exercise extraordinary control, and black people will never be free in this country until they're free of that kind of control. And I do intend, by the help of God, to break up that control so that when a new relationship it is structured on the basis of equity and reciprocity. We cannot allow ourselves to be controlled by any outside group. We must take control of our own destiny. That is what I preach, and that is what I believe, and that is what I'm striving for.
The cry from black American men, desperate no longer to be the ultimate statistics of crime, drug abuse, welfare dependency, or even murder. Instead, America at large has heard, perhaps for the first time, of how many black Americans are undergoing a quiet spiritual revolution.
And you have ruled, and you have done great things and awful things in the time of your rule, but a new world is coming in, and white supremacy and black inferiority will have no place in that new world.
Now, one of the parts of the old world,
as human beings.
In the last hour, the man at the head of today's rally, Louis Farrakhan, the man whose dream is to lead black America exclusively and from a separate homeland, mounted the podium in front of the Capitol building.
I have many white followers, you know that? Did you know that? You didn't? I'll tell you about it. So they write me all the time saying, I'm with you, Farrakhan, I believe in you. We know we're devils. This is the way they write me. They talk like that. We know we're devils. Is there any way out for us?
Controversial black American leader Louis Farrakhan took his message to Washington with an impressive show of strength.
Now, Martin Luther King Jr. was probably one of the most patriotic Americans. More patriotic than George Washington. More patriotic than Thomas Jefferson. More patriotic than many of the presidents, because he had the courage to point out what was wrong in the society. And because He pointed out what was wrong. He was evil spoken of, vilified, maligned, hated, and eventually murdered.
And of course, his recent association with the Nation of Islam, or Minister Louis Farrakhan and others, indicates that he's got a trifecta of black leadership, so to speak.
Brother Malcolm had that same road to travel. He pointed out what was wrong in the society. And he had to suffer for pointing out what was wrong, and he ultimately died on the altar for pointing out what was wrong inside the nation, outside the nation, to the greater nation, and to the smaller nation. We're talking about moving toward a perfect union.
For all the menace of the man behind it, today's million-man march will be a wake-up call to any complacent candidates ignoring black America. What they do with the issue is another matter.
This is a political year. Peter King is trying to be like Nixon and McCarthy. He thinks he's going to ride into political prominence by serving Farrakhan up on the plate before Congress. Call me. I call your bluff. Bring me before the Congress. It's time for the showdown anyway. To show you something. Bring me before the Congress and get your best minds.
There was some debate over the numbers. The organizers claimed more than 1 million, the authorities less than half that. But there was no arguing the power of the message from the man behind it all.
These same enemies are so terrified that over 10,000 black men stood up and thousands had to be turned away tonight. They're terrified. We gotta stop that nigger, they say. We gonna kill that nigger, they say. Oh, but America, I warn you. Dear brothers, while I appreciate you calling my name,
Farrakhan is born to die, but Allah is the ever-living. And therefore, it would be more appropriate if you said, Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar! That's the cry.
With the planned march in Washington of 1 million blacks, organized by a man who has called whites devils, Jews bloodsuckers, and blacks the victims of a conspiracy.
When America went off of the gold standard, the financial doom of this nation was sealed. Now you have a floating dollar. At that time, gold was $35 an ounce. Now gold is between $320 and $350 an ounce. So what cost $1 yesterday costs $10 today. So that means that two people have to work in order for a family to survive. And once you take the mother out of the home and you have mother and father working, then you are beginning the warehousing of children, the mating of children with plastic and with things rather than wedding children to human things that make them more humane. And this is why our young people are committing crimes never seen before in the annals of the history of the human family on our planet.
Louis Farrakhan wants blacks to show their unity and power. He's calling for strikes and economic boycotts on Monday.
It becomes apparent more and more as we listen to each other and try to talk to each other that we don't perceive reality the same. And as we're talking about either reconciling differences or separating, it becomes clear that if two people are looking at the same thing and perceiving it so differently, then the two people are operating under a different stimulus.
I thought I knew a lot about how people of different races viewed things in America, but I have been surprised by the depth of the divergence.
The Million-Man March ended with a pledge by many black men to refrain from violence and reform their lives, a remarkable display of unity brought about by Louis Farrakhan, a man who now lays claim to the leadership of black America and who more than any other also underscores the deep racial divisions within the United States.
But what I'm concerned with, Mr. Broder, is, you know, America glorifies sports and entertainment figures who are black. Where are our scientists, our doctors, our scholars, our people who add to the development of civilization rather than glorifying only those who embellish the civilization through art?
The Nation of Islam is a group that gives a steady message that one ought to. I don't think the notion of them being a black separatist group holds now. There's certainly a pro-black group that wants to focus on rehabilitating black men and, in this case, of making sure that one's own cultural roots are not obscured by one's own practices.
And then, of course, the degenerate culture that is coming from some of our artists. I am angry at that. And Time Warner and those fellas who have our rap artists and promote this degenerate language, this filthy speech, this gangster talk, they have to accept some responsibility for this. And this is wrong, and I will continue to speak out against it.
Farrakhan wants whites to get the message that militant blacks are on the march.
As a little boy, my blessed mother kept instilling in me the love and the pride of being black. She made me to know my history, to know my roots. So I grew up with a love for myself and secure within myself, never feeling inferior and certainly not feeling superior, but that chip on the shoulder that the young lady spoke about is my self-assurance, my confidence, my ability to speak the truth without fear. I don't bend when I don't have to. I don't scratch where I don't itch. I look white people in the eye and speak honestly and truthfully and candidly and unhypocritically to you. That's not a chip. That's just self-assurance that comes from self-knowledge. Teach your children that, and whether we are here or there, we'll be able to make a future for ourselves.
200,000 people converge on the nation's capital. It will be the biggest march since Martin Luther King's civil rights speech in Washington 32 years ago.
I have a dream today. These Negro leaders are running around telling the white man that everything is all right, that we got everything under control, that everything the Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches is wrong.
America, oh America. This great city of Washington is like Jerusalem. Right. And the Bible says, Jerusalem, oh Jerusalem, you that stoneth and killeth the prophets of God, right from this beautiful capital and from the beautiful White House have come commands to kill the prophets. Garvey's trouble came from this house. Go ahead. Tear it up. Martin Luther King's trouble came from this house. Malcolm's trouble came from this house. W.E.B. Du Bois' trouble came from this house. And from this house, you stoned and killed the prophets of God that would have liberated black people and liberated America. But I stand here today knowing that you are angry. That my people have validated me. I don't need you to validate me. Motion was made. I don't need to be in any mainstream. I want to wash in the river of Jordan. And the river that you see and the sea that is before us and behind us and around us is validation. That's the mainstream. You're out of touch with reality. A few of you in a few smoke-filled rooms calling that the mainstream, while the masses of the people, white and black, red, yellow, and brown, poor and vulnerable, are suffering in this nation. I pledge that from this day forward, I will never raise my hand with a knife or a gun. With a knife or a gun. To be cut or shoot any member of my family or any human being except in self-defense.
But when Farrakhan urges blacks to revive their communities themselves, he is also urging them to turn away from the dream of integrating into mainstream America.
Louis Farrakhan spoke for 2.5 hours. It was at times fiery, at times bizarre, but at all times heated, I think is probably the best way to describe it. Louis Farrakhan tried to instill a sense of pride in the black community. His message when he talks about trying to stop the fighting in the black community, there's a great deal of gang fighting going on in the black community in America. When he talks about that, when he talks about trying to cut down drug abuse, when he talks about trying to cut down abuse of women and abuse of children, he certainly finds strong support from many, many people.
How do you feel when you hear so many people, including the President of the United States, who didn't mention you by name, but we all know what he was referring to, say, I support the march, but not the man who's behind it? How do you feel?
Well,
1 million men are right to be standing up for personal responsibility. But 1 million men do not make right one man's message of malice and division.
I think the president probably is a victim of a lot of the 30-second bites. He doesn't know me, but perhaps if he got to know me, he would see that I'm not a man of malice or divisiveness. I didn't start the country on a divisive road. I'm not the father of Jim Crow and segregation. I'm not the father of redlining. I'm just not that. And so it's sad to blame the victim for the crime of the real criminals.
White racism may be black people's burden, but it's white people's problem. We must clean our house.
Recognizing you were wrong is good. Confessing that you were wrong is good. But then if you repent of that wrong, you never go back to doing that again. You make a step forward where we're concerned, and then some conservatives come along and wipe it out. You give us voting rights, and you give us public accommodations, but then the Supreme Court strikes it down. In 1896, we were voting, we were in Congress, and then the black codes were enacted. So you do good, and then you wipe it out.
Today, Colin Powell said that he wished, on CBS this morning, that he wished somebody else had thought of this idea of a million-man march other than Minister Farrakhan. Went on to say he was concerned that your presence on the stage, that his presence on the stage, had he come, would have given it more credibility. What are your thoughts on General Powell?
Well, let me first say, this is not a new statement. As I read the Holy Quran, there were all kinds of excuses put up by the people. They never did like the messenger. They said if he had come from the learned class, or if he had come from this acceptable class, maybe we would have heard the message. But God, the scripture says, knows best where to place his message. If he had placed the call in Colin Powell's mouth, 1 million people wouldn't have shown up. If he had placed it in other folks' mouth, the people would not have shown up. He knew best where to place his message. The call transcended Louis Farrakhan, but I made the call by the grace of God, and God's Spirit touched the people, and they responded.
But you would have.
Minister Farrakhan, of course, will have to be held to account for his statements. But I hope that this can be the beginning of a day of reconciliation for all Americans.
Let me say, I respect Mr. Powell, General Powell. And of course, I think if he had been present today, he would have been dignified. He would have been more legitimized with black people, because right now, he's the hero of white people.
Meanwhile, on coast-to-coast television, General Colin Powell, the black man who's apparently most acceptable to the white population and may soon run for president himself.
No, I'm past applauding a black man for running to be the manager of a white reality. I'm sick of us being played out of pocket. It's really a game. Oh, that's so nice, a black president. Yes, it is. It calms the ego. But what about the fear? What about the real powers in America that pull the strings and manipulate the office of president? We see mayors, we see governors, we see senators, and we built up great cities, but go in those cities and look at the condition of black people. Just because we have a black president, that does not mean that his presence in the White House is a cure-all for the sicknesses of this nation.
But it sure wouldn't be a step back.
No, but I wouldn't want our people deceived, thinking it might be a step forward, when in reality, in most of the cities, the black masses have gone backward, even with a black mayor in office. We're proud of them, but we haven't profited.
We'll be back with your phone calls for Louis Farrakhan. Do you want to sit down with President Clinton? Have you asked for a meeting?
No, I have not.
Will you?
No, I will not. I don't want to seem like the old a Negro that is so happy to sit down with the President of the United States. If he wishes to sit down with me to discuss anything about the future of our people and the future of the nation, I would be glad to sit down, but I won't beg him for it.
Thank you, Reverend.
Thank you.
Today, Louis Farrakhan was on with David Asman hosting The Big Story. And he talked about being taken into a spaceship where he met Elijah Muhammad a few years ago, who told him, this is during the Reagan administration in 1985, about an oncoming possible war we would declare on Libya.
I don't see why we should make
fun of a man's religious
I'm not making fun. I'm asking you a question about it.
If he had a religious experience, it's no different than Christians believing that Jesus was taken up on the mount or Prophet Muhammad made a night journey. He's entitled to a divine religious experience.
In 1952, a series of strange lights were seen over Capitol Hill. UFOs had arrived in the political heartland of America.
The Honorable Elijah Muhammad told us of a giant mothership that is made like the universe, a sphere and spheres within spheres. The white folk call them unidentified flying objects.
They caused such panic that President Truman was forced to speak about them publicly. In a few short years, UFOs had reached the highest office in the land.
Oh yes, we discussed it at every conference that we had with the military. There's always things like that going on. Flying saucers, and they've had other things, you know, if I'm not mistaken.
I went into the bedroom in my friend's house where I had stayed that night. I looked in my face, and every wrinkle in my face was gone.
I know you want to kill me, but I just raised the price. You want me dead, but you're going to pay a price to get that result.
Who wants to kill you? Why? I believe that conversation is raging right now in government circles. Because I appear to be interfering with America's foreign policy objectives in Africa and in the Middle East, they want me kind of silenced or muzzled, and if they can destroy my credibility, as they did Martin Luther King first, take him down in the eyes of his people and then assassinate him. I don't believe that America is beyond that. I believe it's being discussed right now in the White House. I believe it's being discussed by certain members of Congress. How are you going to deal with Farrakhan? Yes, I presented you with a dilemma, but I'm warning America. I'm not Martin Luther King. I'm not Malcolm X. I'm in a little different time frame, and I think you would be wise to see if God is with me, and if God is with me, you would be well to leave me alone.
Farrakhan's call for black men to do better for themselves was the theme of his Million Man March. Last fall, he called black men from all across America to come to Washington for a Day of Atonement. And they came.
For nearly 4 decades, he's been key in the African-American rights movement, but often involved in the conflicts within.
The central theme of Mr. Farrakhan's message was equally strong.
We must accept the responsibility that God has put upon us, not only to be good husbands and fathers and builders of our community, but God is now calling upon the despised and the rejected to become the cornerstone and the builders of a new world.
He withdrew to the Nation of Islam's compound in Phoenix, Arizona. He disappeared from the public eye for almost 3 months. Then he reemerged for that tour of Africa and the Middle East.
He visited South Africa and Nigeria, Sudan and Syria, Iraq, Iran and Libya.
Yes, I went to those countries, but I went to Senegal, the Gambia, Ghana. I went to Liberia and talked to the warring factions there. I went to Zaire and talked with President Mobutu and talked with his people. I went to South Africa and talked to Mandela. I went to Mozambique and talked to President Chissano and his people. Then I went into the Middle East. I went to Mecca and made Umrah during the time of Ramadan. I went to the Emirates, and then I went to Malaysia, and I went to Turkey, and I met with the man who is now the Prime Minister of Turkey. Why don't you mention the trip in totality? I went to Cuba. I went to Trinidad, Tobago, Guyana, Suriname, and Jamaica.
Farrakhan says he does not worry about what the government thinks of his traveling to Tehran where he spoke to millions of Iranians celebrating the 17th anniversary of the Islamic Revolution.
Farrakhan says he hopes to meet with Iraqi President Saddam Hussein. He has criticized the U.S. for reported plans to overthrow the Iraqi president. He also calls reports that Hussein has developed weapons of mass destruction and even gassed his own people unsubstantiated.
Or about his much publicized visit to Baghdad to confer with Iraq's Saddam Hussein.
What complicated the visit to Libya in particular was the offer of a $1 billion gift from Colonel Gaddafi to the Nation of Islam. The U.S. government made it immediately clear that such a gift from the leader of what Washington regards as an outlaw nation, a sponsor of international terrorism, would be illegal. Louis Farrakhan is clearly a complicated man.
We are joined again by Louis Farrakhan from Chicago. Minister Farrakhan, I'm sorry that I have had to interrupt you a couple of times now, and I think I should give you the opportunity at this moment to finish the thought that I interrupted the last time again. You were talking about the $1 billion which Muammar Gaddafi of Libya has offered you.
I'd like to talk for a minute with you about the billion-dollar gift. Has it not occurred to you that because Libya regards the United States with as much hostility as the United States regards Libya, that he might look upon you as a means to undo the United States, and therefore he might be willing to give you an extraordinary sum of money?
If the United States can be undone by truth, the United States should never have been in existence in the first place.
Muammar Gaddafi pledged $1 billion to the Nation of Islam for the empowerment of blacks and Muslims in the United States. Unfortunately, the government of America has sanctions against Muammar Gaddafi, and Congress tightened those sanctions to make sure that I would never be able to receive those funds. So we hope to enter into a legal as well as a public relations battle that money can be freed so we can continue our humanitarian work among our people.
You are a loophole for Muammar Gaddafi, who you say offered you $1 billion, who has in the past given you $5 million?
I'm not a pawn of Mr. Gaddafi or anyone else by the grace of God. And if money could make me a pawn, then is this what Congress is now, that will receive nearly $1 billion this year from corporate America to influence the passage of certain laws in their interest? Is this what the debate is about, that special interest has given so much money to government that government is no longer of, by, and for the people, but of, by, and for the rich? If money can buy influence if you're unprincipled, Mr. Gaddafi could not enlist me to do evil against this country. But what he could do is back me in redeeming and strengthening and uplifting a people that have fallen in the mud and are not lifted out of that condition after 100 years up from slavery. The government of America, instead of criticizing Gaddafi, should say, we will join him, and if he gives $1 billion, we'll give $1 billion. After all, Mr. Koppel, we get $438 billion out of the American economy, less than 0.1% of which rotates in our own community one time. With $1 billion from Gaddafi and whatever our own government would give, perhaps we could inspire the growth of entrepreneurs in America that would attract at least 10% of that $430 billion back into our own communities, that we could rebuild the wasted cities.
I don't doubt.
Nation of Islam leader Louis Farrakhan is recovering from a recurrence of prostate cancer. There were reports that he was gravely ill, but today his doctor said that he is feeling better and will take the next 4 months to heal. Farrakhan was first diagnosed with prostate cancer in 1991.
Nation of Islam leader Louis Farrakhan dispute reports that he is gravely ill. But they say the 65-year-old Farrakhan is suffering the effects of prostate cancer treatment, complicated by fatigue, anemia, and 2 bouts with the flu.
And how are you feeling? Because we know you were suffering from, I believe, cancer not that long ago.
I'm 62 years of age. And if you look at me and look at me well,
I haven't had a facelift. It's obedience to that which is correct.
An overflow crowd packed Dag Hammarskjöld Plaza near the United Nations for the World's Day of Atonement rally. Louis Farrakhan was the main draw, though, and he took the stage minutes later to enthusiastic applause.
Numeri was president. He got along well with the West. I think he allowed nuclear waste to be buried in the Sudan. There was no mention of slavery. He was overthrown by, I think it was General Swara Dahab. I visited there under General Swara Dahab. The Amnesty International gave the government of Khartoum credit for its human rights progress under Swara Dahab. Then Sadiq al-Mahdi came in. I visited under Sadiq al-Mahdi. Nobody mentioned slavery. But when Omar Bashir comes in and Hassan Torabi, who is the spiritual leader of the Sudanese, who has broken with Saudi Arabia and is establishing an Islamic state, I believe it is the fear of Islam that has precipitated this kind of talk.
Farrakhan also lashed out at the U.S. government for using the UN, in his view, to impose sanctions on Iraq and Libya.
And so I'm willing to send you, a group of black and or white journalists, Christians and Muslims, and I would like to take the journalists from the Baltimore Sun and go back to the Sudan. And if in fact the Sudan is guilty of slavery, I am a product of slavery. I can't condone slavery, whether it's Muslims doing it, Christians doing it, or agnostics doing it.
Let me do this. He demanded the UN drop those sanctions, clear the Sudan of accusations that it allows slavery, and press for an end to the U.S. embargo against Cuba.
Malcolm, are you prepared to go into the United Nations at this point and ask that charges be brought against the United States for its treatment of American Negroes?
Oh, yes. Please. I think you're right in my point. The audience will have to be quiet. Yes, as I pointed out when I was during my traveling, that nations look, African nations and Asian nations and Latin American nations look very hypocritical when they stand up in the United Nations condemning the racist practices of South Africa and that which is practiced by Portugal and Angola, and saying nothing in the UN about the racist practices that are manifest every day against Negroes in this society.
And he called on the UN Security Council to resolve the grievances of Palestinians towards Israel.
There is no peace in Israel, and there will not be any peace between the Israelis, the Palestinians, and the Arab and Muslim world until justice comes to the Palestinians. The approach, I believe, of Mr. Netanyahu is not a proper approach that would gain peace, nor the ever-increasing preaching by our spiritual leaders in the Muslim world of retaliation. I don't think that that will bring about peace. It only increases the cycle of violence. Since Israel is there, and it is accepted now by most of the Muslim world that Israel has a right to exist, the question then becomes, what of the Palestinians? Should not they have the same sovereignty that Israelis have? Should not they be self-governing as the Israelis are? And if the Palestinians are given the same human right that the Israelis demand for themselves, I believe that act alone might bring peace to that troubled area of the world.
Later, as a guest of Libya, Farrakhan answered reporters' questions inside the UN.
Yes, we intend to one day bring before the United Nations the question of genocide, not just discrimination, but genocide. And if we can prove to the world that our government has been and is the sponsor of the destruction of the lives and well-being of a whole segment of its population and of the Native Americans and of others,
then I think the United Nations should not be cowardly to take up this question of reparations and justice before the UN. So the stronger we get, we do intend to prevail upon you to argue these cases in the wall, in these hallowed walls, and bring America to the bar of justice.
Peter Knoll is a journalist specialising in African-American politics. He says the British public have nothing to fear from a visit by Louis Farrakhan.
I think the British government should actually be a gracious host. They should treat him like the head of state, because he is the head of state of his own country. And when he comes in, they should provide him with the type of security he should do. They should protect him. Farrakhan will give messages of healing. That's what he plans to do, because he's more mainstream now. He will talk about bringing the races together, but he will also condemn racism. He will condemn racial profiling, which is going on in your country right now.
But there are people in Britain who say that he himself is a racist, and they are concerned that by visiting Britain, he will actually just trigger racial violence.
He has moved away from some of his more controversial statements. Yes, indeed, he has made some statements that were considered anti-Semitic, and I think he has gotten a bum rap on the issue of what he had said about Judaism. The people in Britain have nothing to fear, because recently Farrakhan got together the black family, the Asian family, the white family, and said, look, I want humanity to exist, to coexist. I want to see people living together. He did that with the Million Man March. He did it with the Million Family March. I think he will do the same thing for young people in Britain who are looking for something about black pride. He's coming to teach about black pride the way we see it in the United States.
So what about his views on segregation? Because he is known for saying that he doesn't believe blacks and whites can live together.
Well, he has been diverting from that view for a long time, because there are now whites within the Nation of Islam. There are a lot of people, some of the older heads, who are very upset. There's a power struggle going on right now within the Nation of Islam, because Farrakhan, they say, is going more mainstream. Farrakhan has allowed whites to come in. He has allowed people to scrutinize his organization, and he has extended an olive branch to the Jewish community, telling them several times, I want to meet with you. But there are some groups within the United States and I guess across the United Kingdom who will not meet with him, because they want to sustain this acrimony between them and the Nation of Islam.
Dynamite show last night, Sam. Good show.
Well, Louis Farrakhan came on our broadcast, the black Muslim leader, after 4 years of declining interviews from the major networks. And I thought it was kind of tough to do him, because you don't want to... The last time we had on someone who was very controversial, David Duke.
That's the
Ku Klux Klan.
Well,
he's running for Congress, right?
So last night with Farrakhan, I wanted him to state his views. And he did.
So how would you assess your performance last night with Farrakhan?
Minister Farrakhan, let's begin by talking about the record. Are you telling me the truth is that we whites are devils?
I would say that a devil is a wicked person, and I don't think that whites in their relationships with blacks and dark people around the world have been good or saintly. Would you think so?
Last night with Farrakhan, it was interesting, you know. A lot of people think he's anti-Semitic because he says that, you know, Israel practices a dirty religion and Hitler was a great man. I don't know why they say that, but in any event, he claims that no, not all Jews are bad. And I said, well, I just thought of it, and I said, well, can you name one that you like?
Yes.
You say you're not anti-Semitic.
Certainly not.
So lots of Jews are good citizens, good people?
Of course.
Who are the ones you admire?
Oh, there are many.
Can you name
one?
When
I was a musician, I wanted to play as well as Jascha Heifetz. And he's one of the greatest that ever played the violin. There are many Jews that one could admire, but it's not the good things about people that we're talking about. The good takes care of itself. It's the evil that needs to be corrected and made good, Mr. Donaldson.
Well, he finally came up with Jascha Heifetz, the violinist, because he once played a violin. And I thought I might press my luck and say, okay, that's one. Can you name a second? But I decided not to.
Yeah.
You see the Jewish people as dignified.
Certainly.
You see the Jewish faith as dignified.
Certainly. I never see.
That is not consistent.
Not consistent
That is
with the
not
propaganda.
consistent with the audio tapes that make it quite clear that you were coming down on this gutter religion in a most personal and angry and disrespectful way.
Well, you're what Grammy Hall would call a real Jew.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, she hates Jews. She thinks that they just make money. But let me tell you, I mean, she's the one. And is she ever, I'm telling you.
The sad thing about this, and you and many of the Jews in the audience, or in our radio or television audience, is that, you know, no matter what I say, that repudiates that sentiment, every time my name is mentioned, it is thrown in. This is the man that said Judaism was a gutter religion, Hitler was a great man. That's propaganda.
Did meeting with Farrakhan last night change your personal impression of him in any way?
No, I'd never seen him before, so I didn't have a personal impression except from the papers and the videotape.
Well, you had an impression of him.
Well, yes, I think Farrakhan is divisive in that he is not trying to bring the races together, in my view. He believes quite clearly that the white race is out to kill blacks, that genocide is being practiced. And I guess, I don't agree with that, but if you take that view, then you don't want integration, you want some sort of separation.
I'm a member of the Black Press. My name is Totley Brown. I work for National Black Network. I am not a follower of Minister Farrakhan, and I am tired. I am very tired of hearing you people talk to black people like we have feelings. Black people have feelings. We are tired of listening to the way you teach it, the way you want it, the way you deal with it. I have also worked for the white media. In the white media, I have heard them take out black stories. And I have said to them, why are you taking out a black story? I'd like to hear it. And their attitude was, well, there aren't enough people who want to hear it. Well, I do, and I know plenty of other people who want to too.
Well, it was a good interview, though. It was somebody that you don't see.
Well, I'm glad he came on.
But Minister Farrakhan, you are perceived as being extremely anti-Semitic. Aren't you worried about your presence in Israel or the territories could further inflame an already very tense situation?
Oh, that's silly. You know that wonderful Canadian woman who stood up against the horrible use of landmines, a simple woman with dedicated purpose. Now 125 nations have signed a treaty banning that weapon. Individuals have power that they can use if they believe in what they're doing. I am not anti-Semitic. I do not hate Jews, nor do I hate Arabs. I want to see peace between these children of Abraham. And if there's anything that I can say or do to bring that about, I would hope that God would bless my words to find their mark in the hearts of Palestinians and Jews.
How much of a legitimate following do you think he has in this country?
Well, about 10,000 people apparently are in his Nation of Islam movement as people are enrolled. But I imagine there are a lot more people, blacks, who are energized by him.
Or sympathetic.
And let me just say something about that.
And I hope that Mr. Friedman is not saying that unless a black man is legitimized by white people, we are illegitimate. I am very legitimate in the black community, and if I am allowed to speak to the American people free of these 30-second sound bites, I will also be legitimized with white people as well.
His organization has helped clean up some neighborhoods, particularly in Washington, D.C., that had been drug infested. I mean, they've driven out the drug dealers, and that's a good thing.
Yeah. These guys are tougher in some situations than the drug dealers themselves, right?
Apparently so.
Yeah.
We believe that our fathers were brought to these shores not in 1619, but in 1555, as we were taught by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad in the Congressional Library in Washington, bears witness that we came in 1555 on a ship named Jesus. We have been afflicted in this land for 400 years. We believe we're fulfilling prophecy. White folk afflicted us in this land,
as part of our preparation, like taking a piece of iron, putting it in fire. Lord, if I were iron, I would hate the hand that put me in fire. But as I was put in the fire, taken out of the fire and cooled, and then somebody beating on me, I would hate the hand that beat me. But if I became a product that was steel, that became something in the foundation of a building that was the tallest in the world, then I could understand why I suffered.
So you're not thrilled then with, for example, the kind of stand-up work that I'm mother effer, nigger. He uses the word nigger often. I'm asking you.
No, I am not thrilled to see not only Eddie Murphy, but there are many white comedians who use the same foul language and feed the American public as though the American public are human pigs who can only feel good when somebody is purveying filth and decadence over the radio, the television, and through the movies. And I think whether it's black or white, it is wrong, and it is bringing America down, down, down.
Not only that we're as good as the white man, but better than the white man. Yes, better than the white man. You are better than the white man. And that's not saying anything. That's not saying, you know where just to be equal with him. Who is he to be equal with?
Do you acknowledge the possibility that some people might have understood the intention of your remark?
Oh, there is no question about that.
Do they have your apology for this misunderstanding?
No. No.
They do not?
No. Because
I'll give you a chance to make your case.
Yes,
uninterrupted when we come back.
Notice this. When Jewish people remember the Holocaust and want the world to remember the Holocaust. Wait. Why do you want the world to remember? Because if the world does not remember, it is likely to repeat itself. And Jewish persons who suffered from the Holocaust want the world to remember this because the world turned its back while Jews were put in ovens. I, as a black person, want my people to remember what we have suffered and what we continue to suffer so that we will say like the Jews, never again. Never again. There is nothing wrong with an apology if I, in fact, had made that statement. But the press...
I heard you say God or religion on the tape.
Of course I did. And I explained to you what I meant, and I never mentioned Judaism. Now, if I had made the statement that Judaism is a gutter religion, I would have to apologize. But since I did not make that statement, to every Jewish person in the audience and watching this, I don't feel that I owe you an apology for a statement that was made by the press and not by me. I am willing to visit the board of rabbis in any city in America, sit down and talk with those scholars of Judaism. I am willing to visit a synagogue and speak to the Jewish people because I do not want Jewish children to believe that they have somebody who, if he comes into great power, will put them in ovens. And I want to say to the members of the Jewish community, in this season of atonement, it doesn't only mean reconciling differences within our community, but it also means reconciling differences with those outside of our community with whom we have a difference. So let's sit down and talk.
My Jewish friends will say, Wallace, come on, we've heard all this before. He's not to be trusted. You know that.
Well, that's on both sides.
I know it.
That's on both sides. I could say, well, we've heard that before, too, of reconciliation. Look at the Indians. Look at all the treaties that were signed, and look at where they are. So let's not talk about trust, because I really don't think that you've earned trust. But we can earn it together, but time is running out on all of us. And I think if we're going to make that move, why not let's make it now?
We'll be back with Louis Farrakhan right after this.
Last year, I went to Nairobi, Kenya, stopping first in Ghana to speak with President Rawlings, and then with former President Kaunda of Zambia. I met with the President of Kenya, Arap Moi, and listened to their counsel and advice on trying to get peace between the North and the South. I then flew to Kampala and met with President Museveni, and then had a 4-hour meeting with John Garang, and then flew to Khartoum to meet with Hassan Turabi and also with President Bashir. I was very happy when I was in Turkey to have met with Prime Minister Erbakan, as the Welfare Party at that time was about to enter into some coalition with Mrs. Chilla.
A lot more to tell you about. We head into the next half hour of After the Bell.
But by the grace of God, we will work and spend our lives to make sure that Africa never again will be the footstool of Europe or America or any nation. Africa will rise to take its proper and rightful place in the 21st century by the help of God.
Some say Michael Jackson may have joined the Nation of Islam. His brother's already a member, so could this be a possibility? Find out what our deep drilling correspondent Rita Cosby has come up with.
Show them that you are as convinced of yourself as they are of you, and that you are just as much as they are convinced of it, you are 1,000% innocent.
You know, Andrew, this is a man facing some of the most serious criminal charges you could imagine, and he's playing up the crowd like a showman.
CNN has confirmed that the Nation of Islam has become involved in Jackson's affairs and that it is causing concern among some of Jackson's longtime management team.
They are so damaged by the Nation of Islam being so close to Michael Jackson, moving into essentially one of them moving into Mark Garagos's office, in addition to that controlling who talks to Michael Jackson on the phone and not. And they decided, I am told from several people close to Michael Jackson, that it would be a good idea to bring in a nice Jewish attorney to sort of combat the stain that's come up with this group that has had anti-Semitic tendencies.
Obviously the support groups are already fairly vocal. It wouldn't be very hard to have someone from the Nation of Islam come and speak to us and tell us about where they stand in terms of supporting Michael Jackson, how they feel about his case.
She is Jewish, and she also said, I am very concerned with the Nation of Islam.
Sources say access to Jackson is being limited by Leonard Mohammed, son-in-law of this man, Nation of Islam leader Louis Farrakhan.
But let's hire this person to sort of combat these Nation of Islam, maybe be able to quell Debbie Rowe as well.
The Nation of Islam that has been organizing quite a few of the transportation for the fans that are gathered over where you can't see them with the camera, I'm afraid, over there. This Nation of Islam organization that seems to have taken over a large part of Michael Jackson's affairs in the past few weeks. They've got representatives here. There are others from the group. Not that we know they are, but they obviously are because they're wearing long black trench coats and polo necks and trilby hats and so on, and dark glasses, which is their kind of trademark, lurking about outside the court. There's definitely a flavor that they have some influence in his affairs now.
He overheard some members of the Nation of Islam saying some extremely negative things about Jews and other people of the Israeli faith, all these people
But that is how
at the Nation of Islam, but right in front of him.
But the Nation of Islam issued a statement denying the claim, saying the Nation of Islam has no official business or professional relationship with Mr. Jackson. The Nation of Islam joins thousands of other people in wishing him well.
And imagine this, they're all working together trying to help Michael Jackson.
I got to tell you, if you ever go to a Nation of Islam rally, let me tell you, that stuff is pervasive.
These are all Nation of Islam guys.
These are all Nation, and you, again, standing right next to him. And we saw, remember, we were... reported for first that Leonard Mohammed, who's the right-hand man to Louis Farrakhan, was standing behind Mark Geragos at the press conference.
Right.
He walked in right behind Michael Jackson yesterday in court. I also noticed, we were talking about some of the members of the Nation of Islam, I did see definitely Leonard Mohammed, and he's the person, he's right there, you can see him on the screen, he's in the black suit behind there, standing next to the blonde woman, if you can see on the side of the screen there, and he is the African-American man who is the security detail for the Nation of Islam. He is the right-hand man to Louis Farrakhan, and he's the man who's been standing behind Mark Geragos often in those press conferences. So clearly he is there today along with other members of the Nation of Islam.
Yeah, I know, but you know what? That anti-Semitism is so prevalent among Nation of Islam. Go to read anything, go to any, I mean, I've been called a cracker when I've tried to interview them, so
and
whatever.
Debbie Rowe, who has stepped back all these years,
right, well, this is what I want to ask you about.
This is it. I can't tolerate this group near my kids.
I want to go back to the beginning of this in the Nation of Islam, because to me, with all due respect, that is what we call a non-denial denial.
Does it have so much to do with Nation of Islam or the molestation charges?
And it's a curious association for Michael Jackson, given the fact that he has been a person who has made his living on the fact that he's a multicultural person, has reached across racial lines, and the Nation of Islam is a black separatist group.
On that theme, the Nation of Islam and Michael Jackson is not necessarily a partnership any of us would have predicted. We suspect we're not alone.
But what she's concerned about is the combination of charges, and I think the Nation of Islam is really what set her off.
Well,
she is Jewish, and she says these kids are Jewish, and I don't care, look, you have custody of my kids, but I do not want these people around me.
She signed away her...
And this is hitting him where it hurts.
Rita Cosby.
Interesting.
Okay.
Rita, you got to come back. We never get enough time.
I know, it's great.
You drop the bombs and then...
Never enough to talk about.
Thank you so much.
And never enough to talk about. Never enough to talk about.
Rita Cosby.
And never enough to talk about.
Malik Shabazz, the national chairman of the new Black Panther Party. You saw the Black Panther Party. That's not Malik. You saw the Black Panther Party. Where? Let's see the real Malik Shabazz now. Got him? All right, he's got, okay. I'm sorry, folks.
And never enough to talk about.
We have Dr. Furpo Carr, a Jackson family friend, sometimes spiritual advisor. He is Dr. Carr. All right, so far you're looking...
And never enough to talk about.
Do you think there is a risk to Mr. Jackson in this association, whatever the association precisely is?
Well, there's a risk in a culture that sees any kind of black association as curious, especially one with a leader who has been demonized to the degree that Mr. Louis Farrakhan has, number one. Number two, what does Michael Jackson have to lose on the other hand? Here he's already been demonized by the broader society, black and white. So his association with Minister Farrakhan cannot in any way, undercut his standing in the culture, because that's been so severely thrashed by these allegations.
Here, the author of Inside the Nation of Islam. He joins us tonight from Orlando. And Mr. Shabazz, as soon as he gets in his chair, we'll bring him. Dr. White, you were a member of the Nation, is that right? Author of Inside the Nation of Islam. So you personally were a member?
Yes, I was a member for 15, 16 years of my adult life.
What happened in 1927, that levees were purposely blown up to decimate the black population in New Orleans. You said the same thing might have happened again.
I am sure that the Nation of Islam had a hand in this. For example, you have Leonard Farrakhan Muhammad, who is not only the chief of staff, but he is also the head of the Nation of Islam's propaganda program. He is head of public relations. And people who are following concepts of the Nation of Islam. I mean, when you have people like Malik Shabazz, who is really a sidekick to the Nation of Islam with the new Black Panther Party, you know that there is an issue that's taking place on race and trying to give a propaganda movement or a propaganda idea to the public.
Is Malik there yet? Okay. Scant moments, I promise. We're going to hear from the man who's just been accused of being a sidekick to the nation, Malik Zulu Shabazz, the national chairman of the new Black Panther Party.
Farrakhan is a divider by race. The things he has said about white people, about Jews, suggestion here of the bombing of levees in New Orleans is awful stuff. He divides by race.
Dr. Carr, why does he need the Nation of Islam? Don't you think that that is ill-considered?
Joining us now, chairman of the new Black Panther Party, Malik Zulu Shabazz. Malik, why you're friends with Farrakhan? Why won't he come on one-on-one with Sean Hannity? I challenge him to come on this program and defend this nonsense, huh?
No, all the evidence is not in, sir, unless an investigation is carried out to prove that is only a rumor.
The fact of the matter is, Michael Jackson has nothing to do spiritually or business-wise with the Nation of Islam. That is a fact.
Wait a second.
I'm a little closer.
I can't let you do that because I spoke to a member of the inner circle.
I'll tell you what, we'll bring you back on the program. I played the tape for you the last time you were on my radio show. And
Sean Hannity,
all right.
Don't be so devilish now.
Am I a devil?
And they told me Leonard Farrakhan Muhammad has influence. He's only one of the advisors, but he definitely has influence over Michael.
If you can let me finish for a minute.
Sorry.
Leonard Muhammad, that's okay. Leonard Muhammad is no longer the chairman of the board or the chief individual or the propaganda minister, if you will, with the Nation of Islam. He has a job now. Michael has hired his firm. Okay. That is Leonard Muhammad's firm, and Leonard Muhammad is on his payroll. He's an employee of Michael Jackson.
We must have a federal investigation and a United Nations investigation into what happened in New Orleans.
Hey, Malik, forget about Hannity interviewing Farrakhan. I understand the minister won't come on with me because I sit next to Hannity every night. Is that, we were talking about that earlier today.
And never enough to talk about.
Now we have Malik. Malik, hey, Malik, long time no see. We go way back, all the way to the O.J. Simpson. You look all middle of the road there with that new haircut and everything. Totally, moderate. So are you guys controlling Jackson's life? Are you and your allies at the Nation of Islam controlling Michael Jackson's life?
Of course not. And the only function I've seen the Nation of Islam function is a very well job done in terms of security.
Okay, hang in there, Malik. Now we got you. I'm going to keep you. You two, Dr. White and Dr. Carr. We'll be right back. Got to take a short intermission. We continue right after this break.
Malik, here's the deal. I'm inviting you back on the program next week. I don't want to take anything out of context. We'll play the exact tape I had, and then we'll also play tape from this weekend's march, and then you can respond to that. Fair deal?
And I'll choose whether or not I decide to come back.
Oh, come on. All right, we'll see. Anyway,
like that?
That's fun.
Eitan Michaeli with the Chicago Defender. Why do you believe that the government at this time chose to bring charges against Qubilah Shabazz?
I guess they want to make the American people think they're really interested in saving my life, while at the same time they're working overtime to destroy my life. Lastly, let me say this. While Martin Luther King Jr. and the Big Six civil rights leaders were sitting in the White House with Lyndon Baines Johnson, at the same time that they were being feted by the top leaders in executive branch of the government, out of the Justice Department, plans were being made against the life of that very man. So we are not fooled in the least by coming to us the very day of the indictment to tell us of such a wicked plot. I have in my possession an internal and secret document put out by the Civil Rights Division of the Anti-Defamation League this January. I intend that all of you have a copy of this. This document reveals their strategy for dealing with Louis Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam.
Later this week, Farrakhan will hold a Day of Atonement, marking the one-year anniversary of the Million Man March.
In this document titled Mainstreaming Anti-Semitism, the Legitimation of Louis Farrakhan, which I will share with black leaders, organizations, churches, and others, the ADL raises the question, does Farrakhan's acceptance by the mainstream black community represent a newfound tolerance for anti-Semitism, which the ADL must fight with every weapon at our disposal? What do these weapons include?
How do you look upon Louis Farrakhan?
He and his organization have definitely proven themselves to be hate mongers and racists. There's no question about it.
One of the weapons identified by the ADL and mentioned in their document is their exploitation of, quote, some of the nation's top black political and civil rights leaders who have long been envious
of Farrakhan's ability to reach large, enthusiastic audiences.
Today, Farrakhan is scheduled to speak at a rally at the United Nations to mark the anniversary.
The ADL has a history of spying, not only on black leaders, but all those leaders and organizations that have popular support, black, white, Arab, and even other Jews of whom they disapprove.
For what was called the Million Man March. Organizers are marking the anniversary of that event with another rally, this one in New York, outside the United Nations.
The Anti-Defamation League seeks total control of the masses of Jewish people, many of whom would have dialogued with us if it were not for the wicked aim and purpose of the ADL and its leadership.
Anniversary of the Million Man March. The central figure this year, as he was last year in Washington, the Nation of Islam leader Louis Farrakhan.
In view of the history and the practice of the Anti-Defamation League, this organization must be considered anti-black and even anti-American.
Now, the main speaker is expected to take the podium within 30 minutes. He is the leader of the Nation of Islam, Louis Farrakhan, very controversial Louis Farrakhan. Many people believe he's anti-Semitic, anti-Catholic, anti-white, but his supporters say he's an intelligent, brilliant, visionary leader.
False reports of my alleged defense of Brother Khalid's remarks have become so pervasive that even the Vice President of the United States of America, Mr. Al Gore, has used the power of the Chief Executive Office to give more credence to a lie. His response points out the possible collusion between the ADL and the United States government, not only in sharing intelligence files, but also in shaping policies at the highest level.
As we speak right now, Louis Farrakhan is being introduced a little earlier than we expected. And we'll have more details on Louis Farrakhan's speech a little later. Jonathan, back to you.
Okay, Gary Tuchman in New York. Thanks very much.
I, therefore, am calling on the Black Caucus, the NAACP, Reverend Jackson and the Rainbow Coalition, black churches and black leaders to review their relationship with the ADL in view of its wickedness against our people. I'm calling on the black community to alienate this spy organization and establish proper relationships with Jewish organizations, people, and leaders who are not as self-centered, bigoted, and malicious as the ADL.
Louis Farrakhan gathered tens of thousands outside the United Nations.
The obsession of the ADL with my destruction and the destruction of the Nation of Islam has blinded them to the terrible need in the black community for a unified programmatic approach to solving our problems and the position that I and the Nation of Islam occupy in that approach to the solution of our problems.
Farrakhan, who has visited the Middle East frequently, says that his familiarity with Arab Muslim leaders makes the Jewish community wary of him and brand him anti-Semitic.
This obsession has also blinded them to the need for the utilization of Louis Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam in America to reduce the spiraling rate of crime and violence, particularly as it affects the black community. You are wicked deceivers of the American people. You have sucked their blood. You are not real Jews, those of you that are not real Jews. You are the synagogue of Satan. And you have wrapped your tentacles around the U.S. government. And you are deceiving and sending this nation to hell. But I warn you in the name of Allah, you would be wise to leave me alone. But if you choose to crucify me, know that Allah will crucify you. That's a message. And some have called Nelson Mandela anti-Semitic. They've called Jesse Jackson anti-Semitic.
They've called Percy Sutton anti-Semitic. They've called Andrew Young anti-Semitic. Even President Bush and members of his cabinet were called anti-Semitic because they were acting too slow on a $10 billion loan or gift to the state of Israel. There's an old saying that I heard. It used to be that an anti-Semite was one who disliked Jews. Now anti-Semite is anyone the Jews dislike.
Thousands of demonstrators rallied for reparations in Washington on Saturday. They're demanding that the U.S. government pay reparations to black citizens for centuries of slave labor and discrimination. The day's most prominent speaker was Nation of Islam leader Louis Farrakhan.
Let's start in Africa. According to W.E.B. Du Bois, a conservative estimate of black lives lost in the Middle Passage was from 50 to 100 million black lives.
For an interactive look at tonight's talk with Louis Farrakhan.
Well. If 100 million of us lost our lives in the Middle Passage, add it up. What is one black life worth? Add it up. 300 years working from can't see morning to can't see night. For no pay. 300 years working millions of slaves for nothing. Add it up. Add it up.
It's been an enlightening discussion. I wish we had more time, but perhaps we'll have you back another day on the Fox News channel.
The killing of our fathers and mothers after mating them like animals, then taking the children and naming us after them, stripping us of our language, our God, our religion, our minds. Add it up. Add it up.
Mr. Farrakhan, we thank you for sharing your views.
Thank you, sir, for inviting me.
Black folk fought in the Revolutionary War that made America free from England, yet we not free. Add it up. We fought in the War of 1812. Add it up. We fought in the Civil War. 400,000 blacks on the side of the North and the South. Some fighting to preserve the old South. Others fighting to preserve the Union. After the Union was preserved, we had no Union. But thousands of black lives were lost in that war. Add it up.
Reverend Louis Farrakhan, when we come back.
The destruction of our families.
Yeah, think about it.
Add it up. That's right. You brought us into religion, not to make us closer to Jesus, but to turn us inside out in Jesus' name. You know Jesus was no white man.
All right, Minister Farrakhan, thank you very much for joining us, staying up so late. Judy?
We fought in the Spanish-American War. We helped America steal Texas.
Mexico, Arizona, California, from the Mexicans. They didn't offer us nothing. Add it up. World War I came. You got in trouble. Black soldiers win. You got a victory over Germany. We got nothing but more hell. Add it up.
And I know you join me in thanking Reverend Farrakhan for a very important program.
World War II came along. Hitler got started. We joined the army. Well, if you joined on your own. Baby. When you joined the army and signed your name, Willis Jackson, Henry Morgan, Larry Higginbotham, you signed the wrong name. You were out of your mind. Didn't know who you were. Somebody took advantage of you and sent you to fight for your enemies. I said,
Minister Louis Farrakhan, we thank you very much for joining us this morning and sharing your views with us.
Thank you for the honor of being on Meet the Press.
And
we left our bodies in Normandy Beach, in Palermo, in Rome, in Naples, in Sicily. We left our bodies on the streets of Paris, in Belgium. Boy.
Minister Farrakhan, thank you very much for being with us tonight. Thank you for sharing your views with us.
Thank you.
Diane?
We joined the war. They used us in Hawaii, in Bataan, in Corregidor, in the Solomon Islands, in Iwo Jima. We lost our lives fighting for America. And after the war was over, America rebuilt Germany. Now the West German economy is the strongest in all Europe. We rebuilt Japan. Now the Japanese are world leaders, but black people who helped you win the war. They're homeless in Atlanta, homeless in Chicago, homeless in Detroit, homeless in Boston, in the streets looking for a job, looking for a handout. We helped you win, but you offered us nothing. I said, add it up. Add it up.
I want to thank you so much for joining us. Unfortunately, the satellite is going down. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll have you back.
We developed leaders to help us. Marcus Garvey came and talked to us. But here in Georgia,
come on,
you trumped up charges against him. And you brought him into court and you lied on him. And you sent him to prison unjustly. Then you deported him and broke his movement. And only later did we learn that Garvey was a good man. He had a good movement. He had a good program. But you destroyed it all. Add it up. Add it up.
Minister Louis Farrakhan, we thank you for joining us this morning on Meet the Press.
Thank you.
In the 1960s, black folk began to move. We had CORE. We had SNCC. We had the NAACP. We had the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. We had the Black Panther. We had the Nation of Islam. All of these brothers and sisters fighting for the liberation of black people. But there in Washington, D.C., the government of America started plotting against our leaders. And we lost Whitney Young off the coast of Africa under suspicious circumstances. We lost Medgar Evers. They broke up CORE. They broke up SNCC. They broke up the organization called US. They jailed the leaders of the Republic of New Africa. They murdered Martin Luther King. They weakened the NAACP and the Urban League. Everything that fought for justice for us, they tore it up and tore it down. I say, add it up. America owes the black man. Add it up.
Minister Farrakhan, look, we wish you the best of luck with what you're doing with the Million Man March, and we do appreciate you coming on Fox today. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us, sir.
Appreciate it.
What is the life of Martin Luther King worth? What is the life of Malcolm X worth? What is the life of our leaders worth? What is the life of Louis Farrakhan worth? You want me dead? But I say you don't want that. You don't really want that. If you know what I know, you don't want that.
Minister Farrakhan, it's always too short when I have you on the program and too infrequent. I hope you'll come again soon. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you, sir.
The way God looks at this thing, the present generation of whites, they didn't do this to us. The present generation of whites are innocent of what their great-grandfathers did. But you're in a privileged position because of what your fathers did, and we're in a hell of a condition because of what your fathers did. So if you, the present generation of whites, want to escape what is justly due, then you got to do the right thing. You got to do justice.
May I ask you to join me in thanking Minister Farrakhan?
Services provided and promotional fees paid by the following.
What is the right thing? You gotta apologize for what you did. You gotta repent for what you did. You gotta say, we've been wrong. Now we know we don't want you. We don't like you. But we'll give you justice. Now, what does justice look like? If you add it up, white folks, you're going to have to give us the whole damn country.
Never enough to talk about.